welcome to the True Identity Podcast. You know, issues of identity are perhaps the issues of our day. Everywhere you turn, people and organizations have opinions about who we are and who you and I should be. At Grace, we believe Christians should contribute to these conversations with both wisdom and civility. So over the next 4 weeks, we're gathering some thinkers from staff and our congregation and the community to discuss our current sermon series titled True Identity. We're going to explore how our authentic selves, our true identities, have been stolen by the labels we assign and the tribes we belong to, by the broken systems of the world around us. And we're going to dig beneath the surface of some prevailing identity markers to discover God's truth for who we are and how we're called to live that truth. So my name is Sarah Burt. I'm going to be your host each week. And today we're going to dive into a conversation about politics. But before we get to that totally lighthearted and fun discussion, woo-hoo, I would love for the panel that's here today with me to introduce yourselves. And we're doing this in a special way. Derek modeled this for us in a sermon, asked us to assign ourselves 6 or 8 descriptors. And so if you're a recurring guest, you need some new ones. All right, we'll call you out if they're the exact same. And if this is your first time, well, you can go with whatever you want. So I would love for our first time guest to go first. Introduce yourself.
My name is Corey Cook. I'm a lifelong resident here of the city of Erie. Descriptors for myself, I would say child of God, husband, father, community activist.
Father of how many?
Father of 5.
Yeah.
All right. In what span of ages, please?
Span from 5 up to 18.
Right
so
on.
We got a nice spread from kindergarten, transitioning into first grade, and then from transitioning out as a senior into the real world, into college. So
Incredible.
Got quite a spread.
Incredible.
All the fun.
Yep. So community activist, I would say church member. I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
you got
that's
it.
great.
That's good.
Yeah, that's great. All right, just expand a little bit on the community activist and church member. Where do you work? What do you do?
So I work for the Erie Downtown Development Corporation. So those who don't know, that encompasses a lot of the construction that you see downtown between 3 square blocks. So if you know where Perry Square is, where the food hall is at, I'm the director of operations down there, oversee the operations of the food hall, the grocery store. We call it the missing tooth, but it's that space in between that's dirt right now, but eventually will be a building. There's on the back side of that on 5th Street, there's a building that we call the Wrap Building, which has 4 retail spaces, 32 apartments above that. It has a 312 space parking garage behind it. We also have a building that has the Ascend Rock Climbing Gym right next to it. It has 30 apartments above that. And then we have a bunch of retail spaces on the other side. So just in summary, it's a $113 million investment into the core downtown. We have a food hall, grocery store, about 35 new businesses, and about 104 apartments in that development.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Huge.
If you're listening and you haven't been downtown and checked any of that out, you need to go. Stop by the food hall, grab a bite to eat. I haven't been to the Ascend gym yet. Any of you? It's
My
like on
son
our
has.
list.
Yeah, my son has. He loved it.
Okay. Yeah, it's on our list of things to do. So, all right. Awesome.
Quick fact about the rock climbing gym. It's one of the highest walls in the region. So it's a 54 or 52 foot high wall. I went to the very top. It doesn't seem like it's that high, but if you're looking down, people look about this big.
Yeah.
So it's a very high wall. And rock climbing now is an Olympic sport this year. And so it's going to be really a lot of attention around that. So.
That's super cool. Oh, wow. All right. Yeah.
Go back to
Get
church
there.
member.
Yeah.
Church member. So I'm a member of Empowered Life Church, which my brother Daryl Cook is the pastor. And so I'm a proud member of that church. Love the work that we're doing. Those who don't know, Daryl just actually took a position as the pastor of Second Baptist as well. Yeah. So we'll be merging those 2 churches and with my brother. So I'm excited about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, it's exciting. God's on the move for sure. Cool stuff. All right. Who's next? Eeny, meeny, miny.
I'll go. Yeah, so mine will be like more outside the box because I was told to think of new ones from last time. But Sarah said beforehand that I could have Child of God again and Becca's husband. So I'm allowed those 2 repeats.
And tell us your name too.
Oh, I'm Will. Sorry. Will Bacher, the Grace youth lead here. So do youth ministry, middle school, high school stuff between both of our sites. That's an important one to start with. And then the other newer modifiers, I picked nature lover, music lover, pop culture consumer, amateur academic, and writer.
Okay.
So Those are my new ones for this
Oh,
time.
man. I
I'll
got
run out of
questions.
ones by the end, but we'll see.
Yeah, I have questions, but this is about politics, so I'll have to
So we
hold
gotta
on
press
those.
on. Yeah.
How about you?
All right. My name's Derek. I've been the lead pastor here at Grace for a long time, and been here for almost 30 years. I'm getting ready to go on 30 years here. So that's one of my descriptors. I don't think I used that last week. I'm going to forego child of God and say ambassador of the Most High God.
That's good.
All right.
Good synonym.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I am the husband to Kim. But I'm going to dig through the past. So I'm an old football player, football quarterback in high school and college. I threw the javelin in high school and college on the track and field team. My job before Grace, one of them is I was a manager at the movie theater. There used to be a 3-screen cinema in the mall inside the Mill Creek Mall, I remember. And so I was the manager of that movie theater before I got to Grace. And I work out 3 days a week with my middle son, Chase, who puts me to shame in most exercises, but I can still outbench him.
Chase, if you're listening, the
Had to
world
say that on the
knows.
podcast. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's good. All right. Well, I'm Sarah. I am one of the pastors here. I am a woman. I feel like that's an important thing to mention. I'm a mom to 2. I'm a wife. I love the woods. And because Corey brought up the Ascend climbing wall in college, one of my jobs was to work the climbing wall in our gym. So that doesn't mean I'm like a climber, but back in the day I could belay
and belay
on.
Yeah, there we go.
Yep. So we're going to have to head downtown and see if I can still do that. We will see. Okay, well, let's dive into our conversation. Derek and Corey, I'd like to start with the two of you. Don't worry, Will, you're getting to play here in a second. But
I'm okay with that.
I
They can take the lead on this one.
I just want to state the obvious that it's 2024. It's an election year, right? And it feels like things are getting intense already. You know, emotions are already getting heightened. And so, Derek, I'd love for you to start talking about like why the response of the church and individual Christians is important for us this year. And then, you know, Corey, just follow that up immediately. Like, why is this an important topic for Christians to be discussing right now?
Yeah, I think it's good and important for a number of different reasons. Obviously, yes, we are in election year. I tend to be one that gets a little bit defensive about the idea that this is the most important election in our lifetime. I feel like I've heard that for the last, 5 elections, and it's always the most important one. And to me, that's a little bit part of the fear mongering that tends to go into this whole deal. But so yes, it's an election year, and which makes this an important subject. I think not just because it's important who's in leading our country. But I think it's important almost as a litmus test for Christians to be able to figure out how do we follow Jesus through times when our culture seems to be in upheaval. And, I was hopeful. I preached a sermon at the beginning of COVID, a hopeful sermon that where I talked about some historical examples of where the church had stepped up during times of great tragedy. And that it actually had defined the church in a positive way. And I was hopeful going into COVID that was going to be one of those moments for us. It wasn't. I don't feel like the church stepped up in any measurable way compared to the rest of our culture in terms of being more unified and being more Christ-like and being more loving to neighbor or whatever. I feel like we got just as divided as everyone else. And so I come around to these moments going, our world is wildly divided over issues of politics. Some of those divisions are rational. Some of them are completely irrational. And my hope always is that the church can show Christ to our world, because in these moments it's particularly stark, if we do it right, it's particularly stark, the difference between the confidence that we have in following Jesus versus the confidence that we have in following some worldly leader. And we get to make the case that Jesus is better, that Jesus is truer, that Jesus shines brighter. And And so my prayer is mainly because I think opportunities like this give the chance for the church to shine a little bit, and so show that we can be unified even when the world is divided. We can love even when the world hates. You know, it shows that like contrast between our worldview.
Yeah, that's great. And when you're saying the church, I just want to clarify, are you speaking the church nationally? Are you speaking the church locally, or both and?
Yeah, but I mean, when I use my example, I would say both. But yeah, I think the church at large, Christians in general, is who I'm really kind of referring to. Obviously, Grace is part of that flow, but we're not the whole story for sure.
Right.
And so, you know, my dream is for the church at large. I realize that I have a limited kind of leadership role in the church at Grace that I can hopefully help to influence in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Corey, I'm going to turn to you. Similar question, but why do you feel like we need to be talking about politics right now? Why is that important?
Number one, it impacts a lot of our daily lives, not just us, but our churches and our community at large. And for us to really have an influence, we have to make sure we might not agree with everything that happens politically, but for us to put our influence and our stamp on it, we have to get involved in the process, and we have to try our best to make sure that our goals, our missions, what we want to accomplish, what we want to see happen, we put that in the form of a vote and make sure that the world understands like what it is that we want to get across and the issues that impact us as a church.
Yeah, that's really good. So neither of you, go ahead.
That's a good answer, bro. That's a much more hopeful answer than I gave. because I feel like my answer almost reveals that I've almost given up on the thing and just go, Christians, let's just love and be unified in the midst of it. The fact that you're saying, listen, when you step up, when you get involved, when you vote, when you like, this makes a real difference in the way we live our lives. I just wanted to comment on the contrast between those two answers and say I really admire that hopefulness in the process.
Well, and I was going to say that neither of you were advocating for us to withdraw from
Right.
what's happening and just, heads in the sand, ostrich kind of posture about the whole thing. And so that means to me, looking at it, then we have to do more of this. We have to do more sitting down, having conversation, figuring it out, doing the work. It's hard. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but if we don't engage and we do withdraw, then like you're saying, we don't have influence and a voice in the whole process. That's great. Will, I'm curious from your perspective, as you're thinking and listening, a lot of your work with youth involves students who aren't old enough to vote yet. And at the same time, they are very much influenced by the political rhetoric, the fear-mongering that's happening. And so from your perspective, how does this divisiveness of our nation right now impact the teens and the young adults who are looking to come to the polls, maybe for the first time this fall, but maybe, 4 years from now?
Yeah, so first off, Gen Z is a little older than most people give them credit for. Some Gen Z were already voting in the most recent elections, and they showed up in huge numbers, actually. It's really interesting to look at a lot of the ways that they voted impacted some of those elections. So they are already involved. If they're not voting, they're concerned about the issues. And I was going to say that Sarah exposed me last week as a millennial. I'm not a Gen Z myself, but I think that millennials, a lot of us thought if we were millennial and Christian, the way to reconcile that was to kind of be apolitical. Like we thought that's what it meant to be faithful, is that because politics always cause so much division, that maybe we should just stay out of it and kind of do what you were saying, Derek, of like, all right, well, let's just love people through kind of other channels. But Gen Z is not sharing that mentality. They see social justice as one of the primary issues that they're concerned with, that's shaping them as a generation. And they're tired of the inactivity, they're tired of the hypocrisy, and they want to see real things done through these established forms of government. So it's really important to them. So I think they feel some pressure for sure, because it feels like they have to do a lot of the right things and say a lot of the right things. And that can kind of weigh on them. I was thinking about this one line from Hamilton that has become kind of a mantra of some Gen Z, that says history has its eyes on you. And I think a lot of Gen Z feel the weight of that. Like, oh man, it's like all on me or it's all on us. So I think there's some pressure, but I think it's just a lot of passion to really see change and to really care for the marginalized. And I think they want to own what a lot of Jesus was talking about in the Gospels and care for like the least of these, especially people who are different than them, who look different than them, who believe different than them, who vote different than them. They want to care for the people that are kind of cast aside in society through political means.
That's awesome. Okay, so that statement, history's got its eyes on you, and I'm thinking in terms of your work, Corey, in downtown in the Erie Downtown Development Corporation. I said that correctly, right? I don't know why I've like twisted that up. But if Gen Z has its eyes on you, the work that's happening, it's not just you alone, but the work that's happening, what are they going to see there? And then how are they going to see you and others navigating, potential political landmines in your work?
It's a challenge because there's a lot of different interests in the revitalization of downtown, and you don't want to leave out certain groups. And so there has to be a balance. We definitely need a lot of change downtown, but we also have to be mindful that there are people that are downtown now that we don't want to push out. And so there's always that juggling act and that balance. And everybody wants to see economic development, but there's a group of people that don't want to see any change. And it's important that we balance the two. I think for us, it's been a challenge. We haven't done everything right, but I think looking at the long term of what this region can become and what it needs to be, you have to start down in the downtown core, and it has to have a ripple effect out. And I think the work that we've done up to this point, and to try to reverse some of the decline that we've had downtown has been effective. We've never seen this much concentration of businesses flourishing and doing well downtown. We talked about Dina's and some of the other restaurants in the food hall that are doing very well right now. We never would have thought that businesses would have been coming downtown and flourishing, and especially after COVID hit. And so you have this group of vendors downtown that are doing well. We're starting to build up density. We're starting to diversify the housing stock downtown, which is important. For a long time, we've had 97% of our housing stock downtown has been affordable housing. You can't have one concentrated mix like that. And you can't have all 97% be affluent either. It has to be a diverse mix. And so that's what we're trying to introduce downtown. It's important that we do it, and it's important that we do it in an inclusive way. You can see our businesses downtown, they've been diverse that we've introduced. We have Dominican restaurants, we have African-American restaurant owners, we have just a wide mix. And so it's been important for us from the very beginning to make sure that we're inclusive when it comes to development downtown.
Yeah, that's awesome.
One of the things that I talked a little bit about in the message was the importance of getting involved locally at the local level. You're a great picture of this, but I wanted to just explore a little bit, like what does local politics, how does that impact how successful you can be on the developmental side, some of maybe the policies that are coming at the local level or the administration of a local level? How important is that for us locally, that in a way that actually changes people's way of life?
It's very, very important because you talk about zoning, we talk about code enforcement, things like that, that could pretty much stop what we're doing downtown. We have to have local buy-in from the city, from city council, from code enforcement, all those different entities, zoning. It's all important for the greater good and how we are able to scale and develop. Politics plays an important role. To this point, fortunately, we've had a lot of private dollars. That's why we've been able to move so fast. But now in this second phase of development, we're really trying to get public dollars in. And so in order to get public dollars in, you have to build these relationships with state government, with city government, and try to get state dollars, federal dollars in to try to turbocharge the work that we've been doing downtown. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to have those relationships and to make sure that you're abiding by certain guidelines and you have the right government entities involved. It's all important.
Yeah. Can you guys, this isn't a question, but it's coming to mind. Can you guys speak to why it's important if I don't live downtown? Why is this important for me? Why is this a political, local community issue that I should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I've always thought that, for a region, I think this is even true biblically. You look through that when Paul, for example, on his missionary journeys was trying to reach a region, he would go to the population center first, and then there would be a kind of a cascading effect from the population center. I think about the passage that I quoted from the Old Testament where God said, seek the good of the city that you find yourself in, and as it prospers, you will prosper, kind of thing. And so, I've always felt that everything flows from the city, that when we can make that population center a flourishing place, that cascading effect will happen to the whole region. But that it's important for people who are even on the outer edges of the region and the county and those sorts of things to really care about what happens in the city, because what happens there inevitably flows out, and in terms of just the good and the flourishing that happen there. So I do think it's important. One of the pillars of Serve Erie, is that what we've said, solve the proximity problem. That just because you're not seeing in your everyday life in the suburbs or in the county or whatever some of the issues, that doesn't mean that we ignore them and just close our eyes to it and just say, oh well, I'm fine here, but that we close that proximity gap and begin to do good, so that cascading effect will happen. So that's always been my thought on that.
A little history about Erie. Back in the 1960s, 70s, Erie had a population of about 140,000 people. Currently today, we're just over 90,000 people. So we had a lot of population lost over the last 50 years. And that does a lot of things. It shrinks the tax base. We've seen a lot of blight issues. And so there's a lot of issues that happens when you don't have that population anymore. The only way that you can reverse that, and we have great institutions like Erie Insurance, Gannon, UPMC, great institutions downtown. In order to reverse that and to try to get jobs and people to come in, you have to have these amenities and things that people want to come back to. And part of the reason why we've been set up is to do that, to try to fill that gap, to build out amenities. But when you have that type of population loss and decline, if you ride through the Lower East Side neighborhood I grew up in, there's a lot of empty lots. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, we have great groups on the East Side, West Side, like Best, Star West Bayfront, that are doing work, that are cleaning up some of these blighted areas, and they're cleaning up a lot of the lots that houses used to stand that totally been torn down and demolished. They've been fencing those areas off and cleaning them up in hopes that people will come back and at some point try to redevelop inside the city. Mm-hmm. But if we didn't have those groups, I mean, some of these areas would look like a wasteland. Yeah. And that's not what we want for our city. In order for us to attract people here, it has to be appealing. It has to be progressive. It has to be moving forward. It can't be stagnant. And we have to make that transition. And we have to shift our mindset, too. It's not just the look. It's our mindset. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about money that's coming in from a state level, from a federal level, when you start to lose population, that's less money and the less resources that come. And the less people we lose. I mean, the more people we lose, the more we lose our political influence. And once we start to lose that, I mean, we can be in a world of trouble. So yeah, this is something that we want to try to change as soon as possible.
I think that's good. I think it's important for us to hear that, because in a year like 2024, sure, where we're all thinking national, we can be looking out there somewhere, looking at those places or thinking about what's going to happen over there, and forget that our first call, second call, right? First call is kingdom citizenship, but politically second call, perhaps the local. And so paying attention to those things. Thank you for that too.
And one of the interesting things, and this, we're talking about race next week, but one of the things that, as I was researching for that message, reached out to a couple of African American leaders in the city and was just kind of running by some definitions to make sure that I was, representing things properly. But one of the interesting things is we talked about the difference between race and ethnicity and nationality and some of those things. Race is a construct really built around power, political power. And one of the things that Dr. Baker responded to me, who is a mutual friend, is he said, yes, and especially in urban communities, the way out of some of those problems and issues is to vote. In fact, it's the only way out, kind of in there, is to go, I have to show up because this is the only thing that's going to change. That changing policies is the only thing that's going to change this. And again, from a suburban white mindset, that isn't always front of mind, but to recognize how important those policies are to the good of an urban community, for example, was eye-opening and enlightening to me. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. But.
Sure. And you can see how policies destroyed some neighborhoods. I mean, we talk about redlining and how that had the effect on inner cities. You can see sharp lines if you cross certain zip codes, where one side of the street, you see houses falling apart. The other side, you start to see it progressively, getting better. And right now we're operating in one of the poor zip codes in the country, 16501.
Yeah.
16503 is one of the poor zip codes in the Commonwealth. And so you can see how policies have had impacts and how laws that were put in place and that were done intentionally destroyed not just neighborhoods and the identity and how they look, but also it destroyed families as well and how it pulled families apart. And so policies can definitely change the shape and character of a neighborhood, and that's something that we want to make sure that we're vigilant on now and how it could have a negative impact on generations.
Yeah. And if we're thinking as kingdom citizens first and local citizens second, then my love God, love neighbor is activated by that because I want what's best for my neighbor. I want God's kingdom good and flourishing for my neighbor. So that's really good. Thank you guys for that. I'm thinking, if I can pivot just a little bit, I'm thinking about how fear has become part of just all the political dialogue. Like both sides, both parties, every politician just seems to want to stir up our emotions and particularly fear for, come November, if your guy doesn't win or girl potentially doesn't win, the world's going to fall apart. It's all coming to an end, and this is why you need to support this side, and everybody else is the enemy, and they're stirring up this fear. And so, from a real practical local level, how is that affecting the people that you live with, work with, do life with?
I was thinking about this a bit, and I was thinking like less in terms of like Gen Z and the population I'm working with, and more in terms of like kind of my generation, millennials, and thinking about how I don't know if it's fear as much as it's apathy or like indifference. I think one thing our generation is wrestling with is feeling like all the things that we thought would happen when we were like young and hopeful, not that we're old and cynical, but like I think we've seen enough now that we're like, like I just don't know if I buy it. I don't know if I buy what anyone's saying. And I think it's kind of like, it's become like a show that we just like, I'm just gonna skip this season. I don't like the characters. I'm a little bored with the writing, so I'm just gonna turn off the channel and kind of tune out. But I think to your guys' point, what you were talking about, that is like staying back, not voting, like that kind of thing. That is casting a vote in a way. That is having an impact. And I think the absence at the polls is felt in a lot of ways. So I don't think that's like, I part of me understands that impulse, but I don't think that's the right response. And I think that's where a lot of people are at, is getting a little bit jaded with all of it. And like, what's the point, So I think if we could get a little bit more passion and hope back into things, that's where I'm continually inspired by Gen Z, because they're not giving up, So yeah, that's a little bit of where I feel like people kind of my age and millennials are at with things, but yeah.
Yeah, I think when it comes to some of the, I think that's a great assessment there, Will. I do think that that fear is a common tool. Fear sells. Fear gets people to fear does a bunch of things, and so if we can get people riled up, it's usually a sign of activation. The problem is just from like a neurological, biological response. Fear, we've all heard the two responses are fight or flight. And it goes to what you're saying, Will, is that some people have chosen flight, which is just step back, apathy, avoid, or fight is the only other option. So I make the other side my enemy. I go after them as if they are the biggest monster that needs to be slayed. And if they, go forward, we're all gonna die. And it just becomes this and I feel like that's where we are. We've either people are engaged to the point of just fighting each other, or they've dug a hole and crawled in it. And it's too bad, but I do think it's a natural reaction to the path that we've chosen in our political rhetoric, which is generally, if you vote for the other person, we're all going to die.
Right. I feel like this isn't the first election where that's been true, but we are all, a lot of us are still alive.
We're still
so
here.
Still here.
I don't know. I don't know if that means something or what's happening there. Derek, you made a comment in your sermon. You said we have to allow our faith filter to preempt our party filter. We have to let our faith filter preempt our party filter. I don't want you to talk about it, Derek. I'm interested in what Corey and Will would say. How does that land with you? How does that work for you, do you think?
So that's a super big, thought-provoking question. So
that's an easy answer. Come on.
Put on the spot
No,
here,
I'm
but
just teasing.
I think, so to me, what that means is that, what are you going to first? What's your source of information? What's your motivator? And to me, a lot of it comes back to what are you actually willing to do yourself? And so for how we approach politics, when I read scripture, I see Jesus having conversations with people, sitting down at dinner tables with people, going and doing something about it that's within his control, and getting people all riled up about it. People weren't always in favor of what he was doing, but he knew what he wanted to do. He had conviction from his Father. Like Derek talked about last week, how he knew who he was. And so he wasn't going to let that stop what he felt called to do. And so he did say political things. He took political action in a lot of ways, but he was always in prayer first. That's where he was. He was dependent on his Father. And then he went out from there and acted for himself with what was in his control. And that's where I think it comes back to the local aspect of things, is that we're all so concerned about the national aspect of things, but none of that, not that it won't impact us, but the local stuff is really more what we can have control and impact over. So I think a lot of people skip that and go right to the thing that seems like it's a bigger deal. So those are a couple of thoughts. Yeah. I don't know what you think, Corey, but.
You ask the question one more time.
Yeah.
That's a pretty deep statement.
I know. That we have to allow our faith filter to preempt our party filter. Not party when you first said it in your sermon, I'm not gonna, I definitely thought disco ball party. I was like, oh, wait, we're talking about politics.
Of course you did, Sarah.
But our faith filter to preempt our party filter.
Faith, it comes first. What God tells us to be salt and light of the earth, having that filter on as we navigate, politics, navigate whatever issues that might come up within our lives, to have that be our compass, our guiding light, that over the party lines and the politics. That's just a very profound statement, and something that I hope a lot of people take to heart and really think about, because it's extremely important, especially now, because everything that's on the ballot and some of the conversations that you'll have next week. That's another where this statement really makes a lot of sense. And so it's just, I think putting faith above, party. It's just how it should be for Christians.
And I mean, I think about like just practically playing out a couple of ways, when you think about it just in real life, thinking, when you go into that ballot box, part of this process is education, like learning, understanding different issues, different candidates. So instead of pushing the D button or instead of pushing the R button and just, it all goes to that. But to really, so one of the ways I think faith filter could preempt party filter is I'm not just going to vote party line. I'm going to actually educate myself about what do these different people stand for? What are the issues that are important to me? And kind of have that prioritization kind of conversation in your own mind, and I know people who are, single issue voters, they're called, where it's like, and it may be because of their faith or it may be because of something else, that this one issue is most important to me. And I think whether we want to say it that way or not, there's some truth to that no matter what. And part of our faith is, there are things that are important to me that because of my faith that may not have been if I wasn't a person of faith. And, I think the trick is, as I pointed out in my message, is that God doesn't get boxed into one of our two party filters. There's lots of stuff God says that seems to lean R, and there's lots of stuff God says that seems to lean D. And part of it is us going, what do I think God's telling me right now? What's most important to our country right now? For example, this is not a party issue, but I think one of the biggest problems in our country right now is corruption. The thing has been corrupted at some level. Yeah. And so what do we do about that? Well, if I feel like that's the biggest issue, I probably want to think about who am I voting for that I think is best gonna address that issue. Because if that is in place, it really doesn't matter anything else, because we're not getting the truth. So anyway, I think those are a couple practical ways that faith might affect or preempt, I should say, our party affiliation, is that we look at candidates and issues through a faith lens first.
Yeah, that's really good. And that we raise up Gen Z to be a different kind of politician, maybe.
Oh, that'd be great. Man, better options would be great, wouldn't they?
Maybe a little younger, too.
Yes,
might
start
say.
a little younger, yeah.
Oh, man.
Start with maybe a couple of our kids, Corey, we can raise them up to be, I don't know if that's the
Would you want them to be?
career
Would you
of
want
the
one of
path?
your kids to run to president? There's a good.
This environment right now.
Not right now, man. I think that's got to be one of the toughest places to be a person of faith right now. But
The problem is, if one of our kids ran for president, all your dirty laundry and mine would come out too.
that's true.
I don't want any part of that.
I've tried to stay offline, but I'm sure they can find
Oh, yeah.
something,
They'll know too
including
much.
some terrible pictures. Some terrible pictures. Not like doing terrible things. I'm talking like, the bangs from the
hairstyle.
90s
Yeah.
and stuff.
Maddie, here's a picture
Yeah.
of your mother for the
no,
whole world to see.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Perfect.
No, thank you. Hey, I would love for us to just end maybe considering, Derek, you introduced yourself earlier. You used this phrase, instead of child of God, you decided to go with ambassador of the king or something.
Sure.
Is that the way you
I
said
think
it?
it was Most High God, but that's okay.
Ambassador for the Most High God. Good. So you're pulling from Paul's language in 2 Corinthians when he says we are ambassadors for Christ and that God is making his appeal through us. And so just in this season of your life, and you can talk about it as in your own home, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, wherever, you want to think about it. But in this season of life, what is it looking like for you to actively and practically be that ambassador for Christ? Help us out. Help the listeners.
I think one thing that is a massive temptation for a lot of people when it comes to this political thing we're talking about is to be like a keyboard warrior, to sit behind a screen on Instagram or Facebook or whatever and get in arguments with people. And that's the way we engage. I think for me, it's going to be like, what can I actually have an impact on? And then who can I have a real relationship with? And who can I have conversations with maybe that are different than me? So like, getting involved in things like Serve Erie, continuing to be involved in that, going across the furthest distance in the world, across the street to my neighbor who's right across the street from me, that even though that feels like a far distance from me, and sitting down and having a conversation with them, to me, it's engaging in the things that I can actually have an impact on, and leaving all the things that get people fired up, and all of the like Instagram and like media engagement, maybe leaving some of that behind, and actually kind of getting my hands dirty in the sense that like that Jesus went out and was doing real hard work with people, having conversations. So starting there, making it personal, and making it a little bit more intimate and less like grand in scale, I think would be a good place for me to start. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Derek or Corey?
What does it mean to be an ambassador? You know, I think that, you know, when I talked about this the other day, that there's this, being an ambassador means you're from one country, but you're embedded in another country. So you're boots on the ground in a country, but you are actually a citizen of a different country than the one you live in. And so the brain tweak for me is to go, my home country is the kingdom of God. My foreign country that I'm embedded in is the United States. And so what does it look like for me to be an ambassador for God in this land that I'm kind of behind enemy lines on, if you will, and to be light where a light needs to be shined. And so, you know, I do think that it's coming at walking through this a little bit differently, from a little bit different perspective, from a little bit higher angle, where it's like, I'm not from here, but I want this place to be restored for the kingdom of God, and I want to participate with God in the restoration of all things. And so I like your answer, Will. If I can put my hand to the plow somewhere and go, I want to make this thing better, or this issue better, I want to get involved here, I want to love this group of people. Man, I don't know if we can do better than that.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of talk more of locally. This is something I've seen, and I know you've seen it a lot on social media, and Will kind of alluded to it. You know, a lot of people talk so down and so bad on Erie. I love this city. Like I said, I was born and raised here.
Here.
And just really using the influence and impact that we have to make sure that we remain positive about where we are and where we're from. I think one of the most important things that I can do is to be an example to a lot of kids that were in my neighborhood, and a lot of kids that just live in the city at large, that you can be successful. You can have a good impact on people if you apply yourself and you have the right mindset. And a lot of it is a mindset shift that needs to happen, but they have to see that it's possible. And for me, being an example that it is possible, and also sharing with anybody who comes in contact with me, not just locally, but outside of here, I'm always, representing where I'm from. And I think that's one of the most impactful things that we can do on a local level, is to talk positively about where you live. I mean, you live here. Ultimately, sure. We're all a part of this community. And so in order for us to be better and be perceived better outside of this community, we have to think about it that way, and we have to communicate it that way. And other people will look in and see that it is a great place and that you can be successful here.
I love that word.
That's so good.
Dare we say it's more than okay to love Erie?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
Leave it to the guy from Phoenix.
I know.
I know. This is my month 6, I think. But I love it here. Yeah. I'm a fan. So
Yeah, my husband and I are imports. We have no plans to leave. My husband is very much feels called to the region and his work, and like, let's make this place better. So I like that, what you just spoke on a couple of fronts, the local level, but also like just the spiritual word that you just shared of like thinking with hope and speaking positively and with hope and encouragement. And I'll add kindness and gentleness and respect and all of those things about who we are, where we're from, and what God's doing here.
It's contagious.
Yeah.
It is. You're right.
It is. Yeah. That's cool. So I love that we're ending this on a very like up positive. We're all got a smile on our face. This is great because, this is something that could be very divisive, but let's find some unity here locally. So, Derek, your big idea through this whole series is in Christ, you become most fully yourself. And so that means in all ways that your true identity is found in Christ, including politically. So I would love to just challenge everybody with the next step as we close today. What would it look like for you to engage locally, to love your neighbor locally, to seek the good and the welfare of our local region, our local community? And we'll see you guys next week for another great conversation in
Should
this
be
True
fun.
Identity series. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Corey.